All right, so welcome to Souls in Sync for May the 3rd, 2020. I am Amy Haynes, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this gathering. I am a candidate for ministry in the United Church of Canada, and I'm going into my 3rd year of study for my Master of Divinity. I study at VST, which is Vancouver School of Theology, and I am a mother to 2 children who will stay quiet during this, hopefully. And I'll leave it to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Joanne Aquist, and I am a minister in the United Church at McDougall United Church and a seeker of sorts. I actually have 3 children, but they're all grown, so I don't have to worry about them interrupting me. Just a couple of dogs who might be scratching at the door looking to play. But I'm really excited to be part of Souls in Sync because it's a way to sort of expand my understanding of the tradition I've been raised in, but also to dialogue with other traditions and other ways of following the path of peace in the world.
My name is Ken Madden, and I'm a Kyoto ordained sensei, teaching with Calvary Buddhist meditation. I'm a seeker. I was originally baptized in the United Church of Canada and traveled through Lutheranism to come here. This spirituality that we do here in Souls in Sync is just so wonderful of an approach and a bridge, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Joanne. So our theme for the month of May is new life, renewal, resurrection. And what we want to do today is through ritual, through discussion, through music, we want to investigate and talk about how we can recognize new life, how we can celebrate new life, and particularly when it doesn't present itself as we may have imagined it would. We want to talk about finding joy and spontaneity in unexpected ways, unexpected places, and just being open to the new life and how to nurture those little sprouts when they shoot through. So today, I am going to let Ken start us officially with some meditation and some teaching, and I'll leave it to Ken.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce this meditation. It's an empathy building meditation. So one of the things that prevents us from having empathy for other beings is we don't always understand them. And so this is a guided meditation, and I'm going to take you through visualizing, first of all, somebody that you care deeply for. And then we're going to visualize them throughout their life, from the beginning towards maybe something that's in the future. We start to see them as they grow in our minds. It also implies impermanence because we change throughout our lives. We start as young children, we become young adults, and older people. And as we see these people that we already know and care for, we deepen our understanding of them. And understanding is another word for love. You can't have love without understanding. So I invite you to perhaps close your eyes, if that is what is helpful to you to visualize. And I'd like you to, in your mind, select a person who you have a deep caring for and that you would like to deepen your empathy for, your understanding of. I'm going to ring a bell, and then I'm going to lead a bit of a guided meditation for just a couple of minutes. I would like you to bring to mind this person that you have deep caring for as they are right now. I'd like you to invite you to visualize their face, their eyes, their smile, how they have their hair. Step back a few feet and visualize them standing in front of you, how their body looks, how their arm looks, what they might wear. And as you visualize these people that you care about, I'd like you to visualize the idea of your heart reaching out to them and feeling the care that you have for them, feeling that warmth, that love, the understanding that you already have. Now, visualizing their face, I invite you to perhaps visualize them as a young child, whatever age you'd like to think of them as, perhaps on their first day of elementary school, what they might have looked like, what they might be wearing, what their younger face might look like, their younger hair. Can you see them smile as they head off to school in front of their mom and their dad, perhaps? Again, just reach out with your heart and send that care towards them as a child. Now I'd like to invite you to visualize your cared for one as a young teenager, just on the cusp of growing into a full teenager, what their face might look like. Maybe you can understand that they're full of curiosity. Visualize their hair and their clothing as it might have been at the time that they were that age. Again, send the caring of your heart out to this younger version of the person you know now. I invite you now to visualize your cared for person as a young adult, perhaps as they were in university or college, or perhaps in their relationship that led to a marriage or a long-term change, that sense of growth. Visualize their face and their clothing, how they might have looked. Send your caring heart out to them. Feel the warmth of that feeling and of understanding them and of love. I now invite you to visualize this cared for person as an adult. You can choose any age that you want, as they are now or as they have been in the past. Think again of their face, their smile, their hair, what they might be wearing. Send your caring heart and love out to them. Visualize a connection between you and them. And finally, think of your cared for person as an elderly person, what their face might look like when they're older. their hair, how they stand. Same smile as might have been there when they were a child or an adult. That gentle smile. Send your caring heart, your thoughts, your warmth to them. Feel their care in return. Now I just gently invite you to think of them as they again are right now. And that the next time that you see them, you will hold these warm thoughts and care in your heart. And that you'll now know them deeper for having thought of them throughout their life, caring for them throughout their life, the changes and time that we all feel. I invite you to take a few nice deep breaths and think about them and care about them, and I will ring the bell.
Thank you, Ken. So I want to start our discussion for today. And there's a few questions. And I guess the first one that comes up is what feels new for you in this time that we're experiencing?
Well, I mean, I can start because, you know, my profession as a minister means that my life has mostly been spent preparing for Sunday. I mean, there's lots of other things I do. Actually, more of my time is away from Sunday and Sunday preparation, but that's always been in a church cycle. That's always been the sort of high point of the week, right? You see the most people there, you can interact with the most people. That's when the community comes together, and they are, you know, they can tangibly relate to each other and tangibly care for each other, hear how they're doing, support them, grow in their relationships. And we all know how important physicality is to human existence, right? So once it was no longer possible for us to have this Sunday morning experience, everything had to sort of change in a way. When we didn't have the opportunity for midweek groups anymore to meet together, when the physicality of community was taken from us. And in our Sunday morning sessions, we have a lot of older seniors who aren't maybe the most technology savvy people, you know, for very good reasons. I'm not very good at milking a cow. So, you know, we all have sort of our generation's work, but reimagining what a community of faith or any community will look like when you can't meet physically has been what's been really new to me, you know, and trying to create the experience of gathering together without actually gathering together has been a struggle and a blessing as well in some ways, if I can use that term, because what it's allowed is a recreation. And that's, you know, so many religious traditions and life itself is always about recreation. And when we get stuck and we aren't willing to move into a space of something new, that's when we're in the grave, to me. That's when, you know, death sets in. So it's been a gift and a struggle, a challenge and a joy. And that's what's new to me.
Ken, how about you?
We've also taken our community online. Most of the people in our community are actually a couple years younger than me, funny enough. But what has been interesting is the number of people who I've known perhaps here or even through online associations who are joining us to sit online where they couldn't do it before. They were physically, and we have people from Vancouver and Vancouver Island and Australia and England and Montreal and Ottawa, and they're dropping in and out. And the core people who are here are still coming too. And to me, that means that they're valuing this community and the thoughts that and practice sort of idea that we do, and I'm that gives me a warm feeling that what I think has value seems to be reflected in these people.
Amazing. New for me. Well, first I want to say that I really hope that anyone who's watching this video will take these questions into your life outside of just watching it and consuming it. I hope that there's food for thought here, but I also really want to encourage people to ask themselves these questions and to ask their loved ones who they are going to be Zooming with still, or on the phone with, or what have you, or down the hall from in their house. You know, these questions as well, because I think sometimes we miss out on having conversations that are inquisitive and curious, and instead we kind of fall into routines around the things we talk about. And I think that when you ask people new questions, you get new answers. And so what feels new for me in this time, a lot, but at the, you know, and I don't want to be overly long-winded, so I'll stick with one thing. Certainly my relationship with my children. And I think that most parents would say that that's a dynamic relationship anyways, regardless of what's going on. Just as soon as you get used to what they're doing, they do something else and you have to kind of learn them again. So that's sort of the nature of the relationship, but it feels different in a way. It feels like I'm being given an opportunity to pay attention to them deeply. That's not always easy. Ken can probably attest that paying attention for 5 minutes when you sit in meditation is incredibly difficult. And when you bring another person into the mix, it certainly doesn't get any easier. I think that I'm learning about who they really are, what they really need. I think a lot in these days about what I was like as a child. It's interesting that you did that meditation, Ken, because I feel like, you know, my children are giving me the opportunity to heal in so many ways, places that I was hurt as a child. So that feels new, and in that feels like growing to me, healing to me as an individual, and I think that I think that that will have hopefully resonating effects, you know, with them, but only time will tell if that's true. So question number 2, if you're ready to move on, unless anyone had more to add on that one. Question number 2 is, how do you actively nurture what is new, what is creative, what is unexpected in your life? Because I think, and the reason I came up with that question, if I can, just to give a little bit of preamble, is that I think sometimes we can run over what's new. You know, when you're not paying attention in your garden, what looks dead, the minute you move the dead leaves, you know, there may be something just tiny, or as my son says, there's a ladybug right there, don't kill it. Like, there may be just something that you didn't notice. So I feel like newness requires attention and a real intention to nurture it. So that's the thought behind that question.
Nurturing some of the new people that are coming, because they're just on the first first on-ramp of exploring their spirituality. And it's really not about doing it my way or the Buddhist way. It's really about nurturing people to explore and have that curiosity about what their life is about, and the bigger things in that life that are outside of our everyday sometimes, you know. And so I reach out to them separately. We meet on the regular, and you know, on our regular time. But you know, 3 of us had lunch together on Friday, even though we were working. Each of us was still at work, because in normal times we might have gone out for a Friday lunch together. People like their Friday lunches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're nurturing relationship, and you just ask some questions so that they take them away and ask questions too, you know. So
Yeah. You know, I don't think I spend enough time nurturing things like that. You know, I think I get into ruts and routines. And in some ways, I still am in those same ruts and routines. I'm trying to break out of them in some ways. I know that, you know, I'm not an active person at the best of times, but the fact that I don't even walk to my car anymore means that I need to find new and creative ways of moving my body. And so we have a path outside our house that goes quite a distance. I live near Nose Hill. So, you know, there's a path right under Nose Hill Park that can go for a long way, and it's a dog free or a leash free zone. So we can take the dogs. So, you know, I just exploring that, and how far should I go, and do I walk fast or do I walk slow? Do I take time? Is this about recreation, or is this about physicality? Do you know? And trying to discern in my life those spaces that are outside of work for me, right? Those spaces that are outside of work. What are they about? You know, and being more intentional about what they're about instead of just letting them float by. And so, you know, sometimes I'll just go, it's like it's the physicality of it. I really need to hit the treadmill, and I, you know, put the treadmill in front of the TV to make it easier for me. It's still hard, but you know, and you can also regulate what speed you're walking at when you're on a treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'll do that because I just know I need to. And then other times it's like, you know, it's a beautiful day outside. My partner and I, let's just take a walk and take the dogs and throw a ball. And it doesn't matter the speed that we're headed at, because that's a different thing. Same thing with sort of binge watching television, which I love to do because I love narratives, right? I like stories. And, you know, what am I doing? Am I passing the time, or am I engaging in this pursuit, like fully, in a way where it's going to move or change me? Do you know?
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's just always intentionality in living, right? I mean, we can sleepwalk through life, and just being intentional doesn't, I don't think you need to change anything to add intentionality, you know, to add consideration, deep thinking. You know, I remember in ethics class in university, it's like, what we need is deeper thinking about how we are as human beings and how we're living. Doesn't mean, you know, all of a sudden I'm going to change something new, or I've got to try something new, but the perspective that I have on what I'm doing is being recreated over and over and over again. So I guess that's how I think about this nurturing of that space. Yeah.
I feel that, Joanne, and I really do think there's something special in what you said about just noticing can be new, you know, and I really like that idea. And I think, you know, for me, I'm kind of, you know, if we're talking about archetypes, I certainly contain the archetype of the hermit. That's kind of like I was born and set that way, which is maybe why I finally figured out that I should be a minister, because I pay attention to a lot of my internal processes, probably more than, is necessary, perhaps sometimes to the point of self-absorption. That might be a critique of me. You could ask my ex-husbands, maybe.
Husbands, plural.
Plural, yeah.
Good for you. I only have one.
That's a whole other ball of wax. But
it's called growth, and it's okay.
Yeah, exactly right.
But I'm not quite at the Liz Taylor level, but you never know. Life is long, hopefully. So I think for me, nurturing this newness and the kind of unexpected is also sort of a function of paying attention. It's sort of, for me, I really related to what you said about narrative. So I can really get into watching a lot of TV as well. And sometimes there's a judgment around that, because sometimes it's a way of like numbing myself. And I know that. Mm-hmm. But even then, I almost feel like, I read something a long time ago that, nothing in our experience is ever wasted. And so even those moments of feeling like, oh, I should be more productive or this, or, all the little thoughts that we have, we never know where that inspiration is going to come from. So I may go to write a sermon, for example, and it may come out of that time I was wasting, watching however many seasons of The Wire or whatever. And The Wire is never a waste. That's all.
Never. Never.
Forever.
Changed my life. What do you mean?
Actually, I've been thinking I should revisit that again. The last time I watched that, I was pregnant with my son. So that's, 7 years ago. So it's time for a redo, I think. But anyways, I think that's kind of me and how I am nurturing what's unexpected. And also just realizing that, sometimes what's creative isn't being, doing a master. I think for me, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I think sometimes we think creativity is this thing that's out there that geniuses do, and, and it's kind of inaccessible. But I have just been noticing that creativity is kind of part of being a human being, and the littlest thing can be creative. How I spend an hour passing time, after 8 weeks in the house with my kids, that's creativity, So that's sort of where I'm coming from on that question. And
I like Joanne's word intentionality, because it reflects sort of awareness. That is some of the exercises we do in the Buddhist path, right? In the sense that awareness implies sort of almost just an aloof watching. But I think intentionality is even better, because it implies a bit of an aspiration. And when you're more aware, you start to feel your heart, you can have intentionality to strengthen and grow that. And that's a great word.
Yeah.
I know that, sort of this journey of faith that I've been on, I remember deciding very early in the space in my life where I went away from everything that my parents had taught me about, and I sort of started reconstructing my faith tradition. I remember thinking, I don't care what people's traditions are or whether they have no tradition. If they're atheists, I would rather spend time with an intentional atheist than a Christian who's asleep. And that to me has been like my ministry, is trying to wake people up to the joy in the world, or the crucifixion and resurrection. I think for me are those two motifs, of course, in this time that I'm playing with most, that there are thousands of crucifixions and there are thousands of resurrections. And if we don't have an intentionality about life, we miss it. Yeah.
Amen, sister. Yeah.
In the Buddhist tradition, people often seem to say they think they're seeking enlightenment. But I heard a quote from a UK professor of religious studies, and they asked him about enlightenment, and he says, I don't know much about enlightenment, but I'm deeply concerned about becoming more awake.
Absolutely.
And intentionality is even a better word. I like that, you know.
Wow. Well, thank you both for such a really rich conversation. And I'm holding the intention in my heart that people will have those conversations with others, even with themselves. I think sometimes we forget to engage ourselves and to check in on how we feel about things. And I think that just doing that allows us to connect better with others. That's certainly been my experience for myself. So now we will seg into some music and give time for that to sink in and land where it will.
Northern lights in our skies, plants that grow and open your mind, things that swim with a neon glow. How we all got here, nobody knows. These are real things. These are real things. Oh, what a world. Don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic all around us. It's hard to believe. Thank God it's not too good to be true. Oh, what a world. And then there is you. Did I know you once in another life? Are we here just once or a billion times? Well, I wish I knew, but it doesn't matter, 'cause you're here right now, and I know what I feel. And these are real things. Yeah, these are real things. Oh, what a world. Don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic all around us. It's hard to believe. Don't wanna leave. Too good to be true. Oh, what a world. And then there is you. And then there is you. These are real things. These are real things. Oh, what a world. All kinds of magic. Tell me it's not too good to be true. Oh, what a world. And then there is you.
So I've written a reflection for this gathering, the title of which is Caterpillar Soup. So over 2.5 years ago now, I left social media. And that's not a humble brag or even an outright brag. It's just a fact. And the irony of that doesn't escape me, being that, as Joanne said earlier, the majority of our ministry is in online spaces now. But back then, in the early days of Facebook, back in the aughts, I was hesitant to join social media. People were leaving MySpace, and for some reason, I stubbornly refused to create a Facebook account. I didn't really have a good reason. Perhaps I was suspicious or just entrenched in my mid-20s mindset that if everybody was doing it, it most certainly could not be cool. Ugh. And back then, if I wasn't spending all my time obsessed with how the world perceived my coolness quotient, then I was, by my eye, wasting my time. Now, little did I know then that one of the main functions of Facebook would be in service to the ego. Had I known, I would have jumped in wholeheartedly, much quicker. But anyways, I did join eventually, and in more recent years, I spent a great deal of time on Instagram. I followed some really great women on there, and they helped me in many ways to recover from my divorce and contemplate how to be a fierce, magical, dream-seeking mama. And there were moments of real inspiration and what felt like friendships forming with women who were far away from me and whom I had never met. I was grateful for those connections because I was so alone in my real life. I had no family connections, few friends, and 2 tiny children that needed me to heal and to be whole so that I could nurture them. But I also felt bogged down by platitudes and maxims that sought to express spirituality, which was something that I was seeking to connect with at that time. I was discouraged by opinionated rants that were equivocal in my mind to shouting into the wind. Comment sections rarely evolved into meaningful discourse, and those women who inspired me were not there in the wee hours when the dark night of the soul that I was experiencing stretched month into month in an inky midnight abyss. All the inspirational quotes in the world were unable to comfort what felt broken and anxious and sad in me. And eventually I grew angry that I ever imagined that those quotes could help. There was a deeper process happening in me. It was nuanced and complex and confusing, and at times it was utterly unspeakable. I certainly could not take a picture of it and caption it. There was no hashtag for what I was experiencing. I was dissolving. I was liquefying, dying. And I knew this on a soul level, and it frightened me. I felt permeable in ways that were disquieting. But there was another awareness that sprung forth simultaneously, and it was that there was new life in the midst of this death. There was mitosis, a building up and rapid division of fresh new cells. I was perplexed about how life and death could exist within me in such profundity at the same time. And then a beautiful gift of synchronicity arrived. I happened to read about the life cycle of a caterpillar. I had no real reason to, and I don't particularly remember how I happened upon this, but there I was, taking a deep dive into caterpillar life. Now, of course, most of us learned that as children, that caterpillars go into a chrysalis after eating a lot of leaves, and they emerge as the much celebrated butterfly. The butterfly is everything that the humble caterpillar is not. It is colorful, free, beautiful, and of course, as many inspirational quotes on magnets and Instagram posts will remind you, just in case you happen to forget, it is transformed. Our culture loves a transformation. Weight loss journeys, a sassy single post-divorce, rags to riches stories, the person who learns to ballroom dance at 80, or even somebody who can forgive the killer of their child after 20 years. We want to believe that we can be transformed too. And so we look on to these kind of stories as evidence that new life is possible, that we can be freed from what has been our bondage. Now, we can, of course, this is absolutely true. And this idea of transformation is the crux of my very own faith. But what happens in the in-between? This is where our culture is so often deafeningly silent. We don't speak on it. There is no diagram, there is no chart, no hashtag, no BuzzFeed 10 ways to know list. The shocking thing that I learned about caterpillars and butterflies is what happens inside the chrysalis. Inside there, what was once a leaf-munching caterpillar is liquefied. It dissolves entirely. And if one was to interrupt the transformation, we would find caterpillar soup. Nary a wing nor an antenna to be found, to be sure. Only soup. What is to become is not yet, and what was, no more. It's kind of gross, actually. Seems like a rather unsavory way to be alive, as soup. But to me, caterpillar soup is a far more exalted state than we really recognize. It is filled with promise. In our human life, we might call it liminal space. It's neither here nor there. This is a state of being that can't be summed up with a catchy quote. It is nuanced and sometimes painful. It holds the stem cells of joy and the enzymes required to digest the past. This is the kind of space that the monks and the mystics of every tradition invite and contemplate over and over and over throughout millennia. This is the place where we stand at the veil between the worlds, right next to the divine that surges through every stitch and cell of the universe. This is where we might enter into the paradox of being broken down and also living into a fierce aliveness, freedom, sacredness, and awareness of divine presence. In liminal space, we stand on the brink of becoming, and yet if we become preoccupied with quelling our anxiety or shifting out of confusion, we might just miss it. Our penchant to soothe ourselves rather than paying attention might alleviate discomfort in that moment and yet prevent the fullness of our becoming. It is destabilizing to be in liminal space. But this can be the space in our lives where we fully come to recognize and sit with the vulnerability that we are not in control of reality. What does it look like just to be soup? I can tell you what it meant for me. For me, it meant that I had to turn off the noise of my life. I had to look to nature, and I had to search for the gifts of my own soul. I had to say some painful goodbyes. I had to tune my ear to the rhythmic heartbeat of God that I had longed for in my online connections, but never found. I had to embrace betwixt and between without any evidence of becoming. It may look different for you. It likely will. We all dissolve and come to life again in our own unique ways. There may not be a hashtag for that, but I believe there is solidarity between travelers on this road. As Joanne said, it doesn't matter if you're Christian, Buddhist, Sikh, or atheist. If you're on that road, anyone who's traveling will certainly give you a nod as you pass by. In the Christian life, the life that I lead, there are so many scriptures that speak about the eyes. Among my favorites is in the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus explains why he teaches in parables. Parables are paradoxical stories that illustrate the truth. And Jesus says that through our human seeing and hearing, we human creatures for generations back to ancient Israel remain utterly committed to missing the point when we hear without understanding and see without perceiving. Healing comes, I think, when we embrace the liminal spaces in our lives and the new life that can be contained within. May we all have ears to hear, eyes that see, and hearts that turn towards the radiance of new life and blessing. Amen.
Amen.
So now we can enter into a short time of silence. And we will come out of the silence with a chant that I will sing for us. And then we will listen to some more music and keep this train trucking. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Meaning of this chant in Sanskrit is, may all beings be happy and free, and may all of my thoughts, words, and deeds contribute to the happiness of all that exists in the universe. Pretty incredible for 4 words, I think.
As the moon pulls the ocean, so my soul is drawn to you. Pull me closer as you circle. I will fall and rise with you, and rise with you. As the tide rocks the beaches, lifting sand as it rolls through, lift us up into your dancing. We will rise and dance with you, and dance with you. As the sand shapes the shoreline, sculpting all the lands anew. We will shape the world you're dreaming, dancing with the rising moon, the rising moon, rising moon, the rising moon, the rising moon.
It's no accident that Easter is in the spring. When you live in a northern climate, spring is like resurrection. There's nothing like a budding tree to make your heart skip a beat. Bringing out your spring coat is a kind of ritual of rebirth, and swapping the snow tires is practicing hope, even if you will inevitably skid again before the summer comes. But just like spring derives its pleasure in overcoming winter, a long, cold winter way too often, resurrection's meaning begins with crucifixion. New life springs from death, healing men's brokenness. Finding joy redeems suffering. Deep in the fabric of ordinary life is this cycle of crucifixion and resurrection. It's an archetypal story that resonates with our everyday. And when we understand this and our place in its unfolding, we find salvation. Yvonne Guevara is a nun who works in the poor barrios in Recife in northern Brazil. She writes of how we live in this space of crucifixion and resurrection. She says that our everyday lives present us with evils all the time, tragedies that play out on simple stages of domestic life, but that every evil, every crucifixion can be met with another seemingly ordinary miracle that brings resurrection. There is always new life to be discovered. Guevara writes of Carolina Maria de Jesus, a woman who lives in the slums of Sao Paulo. Carolina kept a journal for years in which she recorded her daily life, how she collected papers from the garbage in the streets to write on and resell, how boxes and iron scraps kept her children fed. She wrote a book called Child of the Dark, and in it, she shares her desperation, but also her dignity, her hope in the midst of daily destitution. She just simply wrote what her day was about, what she found, what she did, how she survived. Here's a quote from her journal, or several quotes from her journal. Today I'm lucky there are many papers in the streets. I got out of bed at 4 a.m. and went to carry water, then went to wash clothes. I didn't make lunch. There is no rice. In the old days, I sang. Now I've stopped singing because the happiness has given way to a sadness that ages the heart. I got out of bed at 4 a.m. to write. I opened the door and gazed at the starry sky. Today I fixed rice and beans and fried eggs. What happiness. And I asked myself, if a woman who relies on scraps in the street to feed her children can find resurrection, why is it so hard for me? If the dignity of a poor Black woman in Brazil remains intact even on days when there is no rice to cook, why, in my first world privilege, do I feel anxious at the dwindling supplies of staples at the grocery store? If these children of poverty can be loved into wholeness, why do I worry so about the child who's struggling with digital schooling? If resurrection can be found in these most desperate circumstances, why do I seem to get lost only in the crucifixions? And it's not to belittle our struggles because they're real. And it's not to escape from our trials because they must be endured, such as life. And it's not like we don't try to lose ourselves in distractions, but wherever we go, there we are. You can't run from yourself or wish away these crucifixions. But I am as capable as Carolina Maria de Jesus of finding resurrection in these moments. But it starts from moving the gaze away from crucifixion to what is wrong, to the evils of our everyday life, towards new life and resurrection and salvation. It means acknowledging our struggles, but then releasing our anxiety about what tomorrow will bring. Because as sure as we are crucified, I know we will rise. I know that we have within ourselves the capacity to overcome. I know that in committing ourselves to love, the sting of death and fear in life will be overcome. Because for every crucifixion, there is a resurrection. And I know we will rise.
Now, at this point in our gathering, we're going to do, I guess, what's essentially a table read, hey? of a Sufi parable called The Tale of the Sands. And this was introduced to me by Ken. We had a meeting last month and just got to talking on this topic of new life. And he said that this was something that resonated for him in his experience. And I looked it up and was just so moved by it and found it to be so poetic and beautiful. And I really think that the mystical in every tradition kind of clings to these very similar type of threads. So this didn't feel out of sync with my own experience and my own kind of poetic soul, if you will. So I'd love the opportunity to read this with my colleagues, my friends, because I think that those threads of our three voices will tell this story in a beautiful way.
A stream from its source in far-off mountains, passing through every kind and description of countryside, at last reached the sands of the desert. Just as it had crossed every other barrier, the stream tried to cross this one, but it found that as fast as it ran into the sand, its waters disappeared.
It was convinced, however, that its destiny was to cross this desert, and yet there was no way. Now a hidden voice coming from the desert itself whispered, "The wind crosses the desert, and so can the stream."
The stream objected that it was dashing itself against the sand and only getting absorbed, that the wind could fly, and this is why it could cross a desert.
By hurtling in your own accustomed way, you cannot get across. You will either disappear or become a marsh. You must allow the wind to carry you over to your destination. But how could this happen? By allowing yourself to be absorbed in the wind. This idea was not acceptable to the stream. After all, it had never been absorbed before. It did not want to lose its individuality. And once having lost it, how was one to know that it could ever be regained?
"The wind," said the sand, "performs this function. It takes up water, carries it over the desert, and then lets it fall again. Falling as rain, the water again becomes a river. How can I know this is true? It is so. And if you do not believe it, you cannot become more than a quagmire. And even that could take many, many years. And it certainly is not the same as a stream." can I not remain the same stream that I am today?
You cannot, in either case, remain so, the whisper said. Your essential part is carried away and forms a stream again. You are called what you are even today because you do not know which part of you is the essential one. When she heard this, certain echoes began to arise in the thoughts of the stream. Dimly, she remembered a state in which she, or some part of her was it, had been held in the arms of a wind. She also remembered, or did she, that this was the real thing, not necessarily the obvious thing to do.
And the stream raised her vapor into the welcoming arms of the wind, which gently and easily bore it upwards and along, letting it fall softly as soon as they reached the roof of a mountain, many, many miles away. And because she had her doubts, the stream was able to remember and record more strongly in her mind the details of the experience. She reflected, yes, now I have learned my true identity.
The stream was learning, but the sands whispered, we know, because we see it happen day after day. And because we, the sands, extend from the riverside all the way to the mountain.
And that is why it is said that the way in which the stream of life is to continue on its journey is written in the sands. So my friends, I am so grateful to you, Ken, for sharing that with me. And I read it again and again. And I want to say that that version that I found is taken from Idris Shah's Tale of the Dervishes. That is a version of the tale that's from someone named Awad Afifi, the Tunisian, who died in 1870. And I did see that there was many. I mean, it's an oral tradition, so it's been written in different ways, slightly varying throughout the many centuries. But that's the one I found that hit me in a certain way. So I just want to say thank you for bringing it to my attention. And you know, it's funny, I had never read it, but yet it felt like I had read it 1,000 times, and I loved that. So I just want to have a conversation, if you are all amenable to it, about what it means to you, what you took away from it, and also, you know, connected in with that, how can we trust the fragility and the often unexpected presentation of new life? How do we, in essence, trust ourselves enough to let ourselves go to the wind when that seems so counterintuitive to many of us in Western culture?
I particularly like in that story, and what I resonate with is that the stream needed the wind, you know? And as much as we all try to recreate ourselves over and over and over again, or we hit a wall and we think we're all alone in this, that there is a wind, a presence. Not just, you know, for Christians, it's easy to say a divine presence or a Holy Spirit, but the presence of each other, I think, you know, like some people in a more new agey way say they were my angel. You know, have you ever heard that expression about somebody in their life who carried them through a space? You know, they were my angel. And I kind of think we're called as people to be the wind when we can, and when we're the sand to release, you know, to the wind, whether that is a spiritual wholeness that we give into, you know, Islam, I think is submission, right? So we give into this wholeness that waits for us, or whether it's Brene Brown says those two most powerful words that humans can speak is me too, you know, this, I have been there and I can help you. I can carry you. That to me is how we make it as human beings in this world, is me too, I'll carry you. The divine surrounds us.
Joanne, now you've got me thinking about beaches, which, if you'll remember, the wind beneath
The
my wings.
movie?
Yeah, the wind beneath my wings. I'll date myself by saying this, but I actually have that on VHS in my basement. It used to be my favorite thing to watch on it with a bad hangover. And now I'm also telling my secrets.
Was that hangover with your first or your second husband?
There were hangovers throughout. But I don't really drink anymore. But that was a good, it just felt very nourishing and very like, So yes, the wind beneath my wings. And I agree. I think we are called to be that for one another. And
that was one of my favorite movies too, actually. And I'm older than you. I saw it in the theater with a friend of mine who was very special to me at the time. And like, I was Bette Midler for sure.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, very powerful story of two women, for sure.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think we are called, and I think that's a big part for me of my own discernment, is, you know, the beauty in my very long story, you know, of life that I've had. And so many of my gifts for ministry come out of the adversity that I have faced, in which those gifts have been refined. So I think you're speaking to me directly when you say that. I feel that very strongly. What about you, Ken? I mean, this was your suggestion, really, and I would love for you to share with people what it is that you take from this story.
Well, there's two things. But for today, I'll talk about one, which is that some of the things that cause us the most difficulty in our life is the perceptions and attachments that we hold on to. You know, our inner voice sometimes saying you're not good enough, and you keep repeating it and you start to believe it. Or I must have it this way, or I must have it that way. In our tradition, and even in my own sort of explorations of trying to be a little bit more woke, or whatever the word is when you let go of those attachments, and I sometimes visually think of it in my mind as standing on the edge of a cliff over an ocean and just going and falling forward and letting go. And of course, in the poem, that's what the stream has done as well. It's just falling forward and letting go of my things that cause me difficulty and harm. And that those are always they're always perceptions that I own that cause me difficulty and harm. You know, oh, I'm getting up in the morning and it's snowing and I hate that. Well, that bugs you. But if you get up in the morning, you're going, it's snowing and it's cold, but look how beautiful it is. Mm-hmm. The first one is an attachment to a view, and the second one is a perception that you can build within yourself. So this reflects that. Yeah, and I love that freedom, and that stream reinvents itself on the other side because of the freedom that it's now felt.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Ken. And I have to say, though, I don't think we're allowed to say the word snow this early in May for fear that it may come.
You did stay at the beginning. No more cussing because we're recording. And SNOW fits in that, yes.
Not that I have any attachment or feeling about it, but I've just heard that Albertans shouldn't say that in May.
Don't speak it. Dare not speak its name.
I want to share, if I can, before we say goodbye to one another, and this beautiful gathering, something that came for me, and it didn't come the first time. It actually came through us sharing the reading. And that was when Ken said, you know, I can't find the line exactly, but even to become a quagmire will take you several more years. I mean, that just like,
Yeah, a marsh, yeah.
like when I apply that to the path of my own life and the energy that it has taken to deny what wants to live because of my own fear, because of my lack of self-belief or my lack of faith in a greater power, whatever it was that was holding me back personally. I spent many cycles doing that quagmire thing, where you spend years in a rut, in a space that is not meant for you. There is a greater calling to you, and our fear can really do that. And it just really struck me when you read it, Ken. I didn't get the first, second, third time that I read it, but when you said it, I was like, oh yeah, even if you don't want to do this, you're still going to spend many years doing some other BS, we'll call it.
Yeah.
You know, here's something else that really struck me too, because I remember when I was young and in therapy, trying to overcome my beautiful upbringing. You know, sometimes you have to do that, overcome your beautiful upbringing.
Present.
And my therapist said something about being engulfed by other people, right? And it struck me as we were talking about that stream that goes into that sand, like the sand absorbs it and keeps absorbing it, that we sometimes find comfort in being absorbed by other people, other ideas, other things. We lose our identity completely by being absorbed by something else. And a lot of us, I think, seek that in a way, that absorption into someone else, particularly in, you know, my first husband, it was a very short marriage, but I remember describing us as being corroded together. Do you know what I mean? Like we were somehow stuck, but it wasn't it wasn't because the batteries were working. And sometimes, especially I think young women are told that if you find the right person, I know young men too, old men, whatever, people, if you find the right person, you'll be complete. And really what ends up happening is you become absorbed, right? You got to be complete in yourself in a way. And even if that's transformational, even if that means that this stream has to be carried, it has to become with the wind until it can drop again. It's so important to have agency and integrity of yourself and to recognize that, you know, like think about this. I would rather be in the quagmire than be absorbed, you know?
We get a lot out of the quagmire. Don't get me wrong.
Well, and I think it's, and sometimes it's necessary until we're ready. Do you know what I mean? Because there's the other thing where I'm just going to skip over all this and not be intentional about it. But that fear of being absorbed, which I think my therapist said was a fear of women. It's a big fear of women to be engulfed by their partner, do you know? And there were so many things I've been engulfed in or absorbed by in my life. One was religion, for sure.
And toxic masculinity, people pick it up and men apply it to women to influence them, and it's terrible.
I think too, you know, you guys, there's a real, one of my interests as a ministry student and as a human being is trauma, you know, and trauma is generational, certainly for people of color, but for everyone. And I think that the way that we behave when we're traumatized leads us to things like codependency, leads us to things like enmeshment. I mean, we are reenacting the kind of the wounds of our great grandmothers and grandfathers in many ways. And so one of the things that I love about scripture, Christian scripture, is, and of course, Joanne, you'll know the sins of the father are visited upon even the seventh generation. And I take that to be so amazing that, you know, in ancient Israel, they were writing that. And now we have these studies of like epigenetics that can prove by science, you know, yes, in fact, these sins, which are not necessarily the idea of personal sin, but the idea of trauma perhaps, or of pain or of suffering, can be then visited down. But one of the things I've really been interested in is, you know, can the blessings also be transmitted? Can the grace and the glory also be transmitted? Because there is no one-dimensional human being. And so even in their trauma, they also had grace and glory. So I kind of like thinking about it that way. When I'm thinking about, you know, this sort of fragile space of how do we do a theology that is sensitive to trauma, that doesn't kind of injure people or say that, you know, suffering is the goal, or you should suffer, or, you know, you only learn in suffering, but that is tuned and sensitive to what it is to be a human being who suffers. And that there is a life beyond that too. It's a mouthful, but it's something that I hope to spend my life working on and trying to find new ways to articulate in ways that can touch on people's hearts.
You know, I knew an Indigenous woman. She was young, about the same age as me when I was younger. And we were talking once and about this generational thing in a way. And she said that one of the sort of prophecies of the Indigenous community was, I think it was in the 7th generation, we will rise, you know, and it fits so beautifully with that sins of the father visited unto the 6th and 7th generation, at the 7th generation will overcome. You know?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, also the seventh is Jubilee, right? Which is another really interesting,
that's
you know,
exactly
kind of
starting
context.
again. It is this whole cycle of life, but not just our lives, but of the universe in a way. Like, and maybe we bring this back to the old GP, which is what I call the global pandemic. You know,
I love that you have given a nickname.
That's right, the old GP. It's almost like the sins of the father have been visited, you know, or the sins of the ancestors have been visited on us. And now our question is, do we pass it on to another generation, or do we rise? You know, that's the question before us right now. Do we pass it on, or do we rise?
I think that's beautiful. Beautiful. And it's funny that you have that question, because I realized that in our earlier discussion, there was a question that remained unasked, and that was planned to be asked. And I think it was for a reason. I think it's supposed to be now and not then. And so to end this piece of our conversation, I just want to ask the two of you, do you think that joy can be found in discomfort? Do you think that spontaneity can be found in the mundane? And why or why not? And I think I know your answers, but I would just love to hear you speak on that.
Well, it's funny. You go ahead, Ken.
Where else does it come from? So, yeah, just a question to answer. Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
So this is a really important thing to me, actually, and I've preached sermons on it, and I have a picture that I gave to my daughter on her 16th birthday, which has the words "find joy" on it, because it was a lifeline. We took our family to Toronto, sort of. My husband got a contract there, and it was like a spur of the moment thing, which I've done in my life. I regret, both of us regret doing this, actually. We learned lots, but it was like financial disaster. It was like really hard on our kids. So many things. Now with my wisdom, I might not have done that, but for me, it was like an adventure. We're going to move off to Toronto, and my kids were really unhappy there. It's just like 2 weeks later, they're in a brand new school and in new places. They didn't understand, you know, there's differences in the way people are in Ontario versus Alberta, you know, like friendliest people in the sense of everybody introduced themselves and told us which house on the street they lived on, but, you know, wouldn't say hi in the elevator kind of thing. You know, this is a Western thing that anybody is, you say hello to. So they were having a really hard time adjusting, and they were like grade 6 and grade 8 and 4 years old. So those are tough times to move. And when I was dropping them off at school, they'd be complaining. And I said to them, you know, I understand why you're unhappy, and I get that, but your life will be so much richer and easier if in every moment you can find some joy. You know, is there joy somewhere to be found here? And that's not a way of escaping. Like, finding joy is not being absorbed into hedonism or any of those other things so that you can forget your pain, but it's just breathing in the moment and saying, yeah, it hurts right now, it really, really hurts, but my husband loves me dearly, or my partner is everything to me in this time. Or sometimes finding joy is just, the world is a beautiful place. Look at the buds on the trees, you know? And the reality is, if we never experience those moments of distress, those quagmires, we wouldn't understand just how beautiful joy tastes, you know? Not one of those people who says, God sent us this to learn this, you know?
No.
Like, I think that that's a horrible, horrible way to look at things. But I am one of those people who says in every part of our life, the divine is there crying with us sometimes and enliven us in another time. And we can learn and grow and change in every situation. It's open to us. It's not foisted upon us. It's open to us. And finding joy, like, that's why, in fact, we might all get tattoos, find joy, because it is the mantra that we live by.
I think that's amazing. I think that joy is kind of like I talked in my reflection about kind of the travelers on the road. I think it's kind of a gift of being on that road for a little while. Of course, little babies are joyful in another way, but I feel like it's kind of hard-earned joy.
Yeah.
And so you kind of, from my experience, I've become more joyful the more that I've experienced, the more that I've gone through, because I had to learn it as a way to survive, you know, because life is hard and it can certainly feel lonely and like suffering. And for many people, it just sort of feels like a series of quagmires.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're waiting for happiness, which I think is what our culture sells us,
Right.
that is a whole different
Big
ball
difference.
of wax, because you can never seem to grab onto it. You know, it's like, okay, I lost this much weight. Okay, I moved. Okay, I did this, I did that. And it's always kind of like sand going through your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
But for joy, it is like, man, you know, my kids have been in the house with me for 8 weeks. I mean, and we went outside and we counted how many trees have leaves, not buds. We were looking for leaves, you know? And so we counted, and it was just a joyful thing to do, you know, to feel the sun on your face, to eat, you know, something nice, to have a cup of coffee in the morning. You know, these really small things can be so joyful. So that's kind of my take on joy, and as far as spontaneity in the mundane, I think that's the best place to find it. Joanne, you mentioned
of ordinary life.
Yeah, you mentioned hedonism earlier, and I lived a life of hedonism. You know, I drank the drinks, I did all the things, you know, that we do to be crazy, to be so-called free. And I was in the most bondage of anyone. And I'm so much more free and spontaneous as like a boring version of myself than as that like life of the party, like girl, you know? So yeah.
It's actually part of our weekly practice to share joys. A circle of people and just one to the other. And when somebody else is telling you their joy, and it's usually something small like sunshine or your cat or something, and you sip from their joy, and they sip from your joy.
Yeah, good way.
And what happens is, outside of that moment of sharing weekly, you start noticing joys more often. And so it becomes part of you can strengthen your joy.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot to teach each other about that. And I think that sharing is a wonderful, wonderful practice. So I'm cognizant of our time, and I want to bring this beautiful gathering to close. I found, well, as I said earlier, I go to VST, and one of the professors there is a beautiful Indigenous man named Ray Aldred, who shared in a service some months ago a beautiful prayer by a gentleman named Black Elk. Now, Black Elk lived about 100 years ago, was born about 100 years ago, and was a mystic and a seer, took from his own Indigenous culture, but also taught as a Catholic teacher. And I have been reading about him over the last few weeks, was really moved by this prayer. And I came to find some of the visions that he had written down after being in a mystical state. And he's somebody that's been looked at a lot by, Joanne, remind me, oh, Joseph Campbell, that's the name of the guy I'm thinking of. So just a real interesting character, and I recommend anybody to read about him and learn about him. And I offer this prayer and kind of vision with all respect, of course, knowing that I'm not Indigenous and I don't present myself that way, but I appreciate this beautiful vision for all people. And so this is the vision of the sacred hoop. You have noticed that everything an Indian does is in a circle. And that is because the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. In the old days, when we were a strong and happy people, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation. And so long as the hoop was unbroken, the people flourished. The flowering tree was the living center of the hoop, and the circle of the four quarters nourished it. The east gave peace and light, the south gave warmth, and the west gave rain, and the north, with its cold and mighty wind, gave strength and endurance. And so he says, I was standing on the highest mountain of them all, and round about beneath me was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and I understood more than I saw. For I was seeing in a sacred manner the shapes of all things in the spirit, and the shape of all shapes as they must live together like one being. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy, but anywhere is the center of the world. Anywhere is the center, including where you are. And within that center is your own vision, your own newness, your own joy, which ultimately is joy for all beings. May each of you see with new eyes, and may each of you find new centers always. Let it be so.
Amen.
So I'm sad to say goodbye.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this so much, and I'm really sad to say goodbye. I'm grateful for the time we got to spend together, and I hope that this May installment of Souls in Sync is able to reach many ears, many eyes, many hearts, and that we are able to reconvene with a new center and a new vision and renewed strength in person soon. And in the meantime, maybe another online gathering in June. We'll see. But yeah, just thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Amy.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Joanne.
Yes.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. Go in peace.
Go in
And
peace.
so it is.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Oh, I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, you know how I feel. Blossom in the tree, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good. Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean. Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleep in peace when day is done, that's what I mean. And this old world is a new world, and a bold world for me. Stars when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom, it is mine, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, and I'm feeling good.